with Syria and most recently with Ukraine. Obviously, the US and India don't always find themselves on the same page on global issues. So how do we talk about being a defining partnership or even strategic partners, and certainly how do we talk about being global partners?
Yeah, I think it's what you raised is very important, and I don't think there's a very clear-cut answer, but I'll try to discuss with you, and please interrupt me at any point of time if you think I'm going off the track. First presumption is, that during the Cold War, relations were bad. Post-Cold War, getting after the collapse of the Soviet Union, things became better. And then, the full prospects were not realized earlier, but then starting off with, the Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee's time, relations have been steadily on the upswing. Actually, it is not true. Sometimes you had a very close relationship, during the Cold War. You had, for instance, a huge sort of upswing during, for instance, the Kennedy presidency during 1962. You had also, again at the height of the Cold War, very good equation between Indira Gandhi and Reagan, and carried on by Rajiv Gandhi. Very, very close. We got, in terms of defense cooperation also, some and strategic cooperation, certain things at the height of the Cold War, which were not even given to some US allies, like the supercomputer, which was sent to Bangalore, the Cray XMP supercomputer. And there are many other things for the light combat aircraft, the Gen electric engines. I don't want to give a long list, but it was not as, simple as all that. So what you have today is, starting with, I would say, the next steps in strategic partnership, which was announced by Prime Minister Vajpayee and President George W. Bush. It has been steadily on the upswing, and that period, the most rapid transformation was from that January 2004 till the end of 2008. Since then, it has sort of, flattened a little bit, plateaued, and I would describe it as a relationship which is developing into a strategic partnership. Yeah. We have a lot of convergences. We have differences. On Russia, for instance, it's a very major difference which we have, and there's a long history to that. But we fundamentally differ on that. But on other issues, the differences are not that much as it is apparent. Because, very frankly, both our countries have double standards in terms of intervention in internal affairs. We had problems with the Soviets, for instance, when we intervened in Bangladesh. They said, why are you intervening in a civil war? What is it to you? It's a refugee problem. So, we had, or what we did in Sri Lanka, and whether it's daytime, our military aircraft flew in, and there's, into their airspace and relief drop in many of the other kind of things. So both countries act in terms of their perceived interests. Both countries will continue to do so, but we'll have to see how much the interests intersect, and they intersect to a great degree, because today you have, Latha, let's say, for instance, the economy, which is so important for us. The US is our largest trading partner, but it's not just the largest. It's our biggest export destination. It is also one of the few countries where we have a positive balance of trade, 2:1 in our favor. It has emerged as the biggest defense supplier, equipment supplier. It has, in terms of the many other areas which we can go into later, but where they are becoming our most important partner. And today it is the sole superpower, but it is not a unipolar world. So there are possibilities for both of us to work together?
I think, so, I mean, a particular area of interest for us, and which has been emphasized a lot in the talking about possible outcomes from this visit, and the next high point in our relationship has been defense cooperation. And, it seems to be a foregone conclusion that we will extend the Defense Framework Agreement for the next 10 years. But the interesting development which has happened over the last 24 hours, which we talked about earlier this evening, has been the nature of what is going to be put into that agreement. And I understand there are fierce debates going on in Delhi at the moment among the opinion makers and movers and shakers. And I'm referring to the article in the Telegraph. As you mentioned, apparently what the press reports say, and if this is in fact true, 11-year-old proposal from the Pentagon is being revived that will enable India and the US to grant mutual access to each other's military bases, refuel and replenish warships and fighter planes, and in a contingency participate jointly in multi-nation military operations. Now, please note that this is not a statement by the government. This is simply a speculative article in the press, quoting informed sources in government. The fundamental issue is they're talking about the 3 foundational agreements having to be signed, which were not signed when we signed the original framework defense agreement. If in fact this happens, if these foundational agreements are signed, this is going to mean a quantum shift in the kind of defense relations you have. Because the first of these is the LSA, which is an arrangement which the US originally had only with members of the NATO alliance. And you know that we've shied away from having more than a very outsider role with NATO so far. The US now has such agreements with more than 80 countries, and it enables 3 kinds of transactions between the US military and the countries involved. Replacement in kind, equal value exchange of material, equipment, but not necessarily of lethal equipment. The agreement by itself doesn't give the US the right to base its military on foreign soil. So I think the leap of logic that the journalist has made in saying that this will automatically happen may not happen, but it does give the enabling power. But it does grant access to military stations of signatory countries. So it opens up your system. The second one is the CISMOA. I won't even attempt to pronounce that acronym.
We can call it SISMOA.
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 The Communications Interoperability and Security Memorandum of Agreement asks of buyers of sophisticated military communication and detection systems to ensure that the hardware is compatible with American systems. And the third one, BECA, requires secrecy provisions to be signed before using US equipment for communications and access to satellite networks. So as you can see, the reason why there is a lot of comment on this article, on this revelation, is because US law requires any country to sign these 3 pacts before agreeing to transfer sophisticated military technology and weapons. We've heard in recent months about the development of the Defense Technology Initiative and the possibility of co-production of even unmanned aerial vehicles and so on. How do you think these latest revelations or developments would fit into the whole question of defense cooperation between India and the US?
Right, okay. One, if you can just go back, I was just talking about that earlier. A lot of people, and believe me, and there were a number of people in government, even at the cabinet level, were not in tune with what was done earlier. Let's say by the UPA government, they were not aware of what was being done earlier during the time of Indira Gandhi or by Rajiv Gandhi. we had, our rhetoric and actually what was happening in reality did not match a number of times. And it does not. So people went by the rhetoric and ignored the reality of the changes. One is there was a definite shift when, and particularly post-Afghanistan, and Indira Gandhi took a decision to diversify arms supplies from the Soviet Union. Continue. We're not abandoning, but diversify. Initially to the West European countries, and we had that, number of things I don't want to get into, and also made moves to the United States, which I have described earlier during the Reagan period, and that was continued by Rajiv Gandhi. Second, so it was not a new thing what happened in 2005. Even the 2005 framework, which I was responsible for drafting, which was signed just a month before, it was below the radar. People focused on the nuclear deal, but missed out that important element of that, which was the 2005 framework. Now, the 2005 framework was treated as, people didn't look into it in detail, but actually it envisaged also high technology, R&D, co-production was envisaged in that, but we didn't fulfill it. It took many years till the Defense Trade and Technology Initiative. This was earlier. We talk about Make in India, many things, bilateral relationships should be converted into a partnership. All that was envisaged and more. But the new element which was added is co-development. That means not only producing it, because that's hardly any technology, like we used to license production. License production is hardly transfer of technology. You're basically doing an assembly job. So it envisaged all of that, and that is now being put into shape. Now what happened, you raised these so-called foundational agreements, which the American use. I don't see why we should use American terminology. Basically, they are to ensure interoperability. Now, if you have any operations, let's say your naval operations, or particularly Navy. Navy was the most directly involved, and it'll cover more than 80% of all your what you call interoperability. To a lesser extent, it will be the Air Force, and the least will be the Army, because of what you're operating in terms of your own maritime security, in terms of your economic interests, and so on and so forth. Now, what happened was, at least as far as about the BECA, I'm not fully aware, but about the other two, SISMOA and the LSA. The LSA, for instance, is not that NATO one. In fact, it is not the standard text. Yeah. It's completely an India-specific text, because in that we found a number of objections. And we say, no, this part we cannot accept, because we are not an ally. We are not a military ally.
Correct.
And we want to make this relationship, because the US has got used to dealing with either adversaries or allies. But this is a partnership. So we said some of those clauses we had problems with. There were intensive discussions. What we came out was with a joint document, and they accepted our draft. Then, same with the SISMOA. The SISMOA is not the standard draft. Not the standard draft. It is something which was negotiated. And finally, all the concerns which we had expressed, or even which were privately expressed to me, were all accommodated. And so basically, when I last saw it, it was the US had accepted our draft. So if we have a difficulty in accepting...
Are we talking about the extension of the agreement? Or are we talking about the original agreement?
I'm talking of the
original
SISMOA.
2005 agreement.
No. Yeah. SISMOA, there is a new one. No, those were draft stage.
Yeah.
Which were the LSA, the SISMOA, I'm talking of those two. The other one I spoke about, that was the 2005 agreement. They are called quite separate.
Yes.
That's why I'm taking them separately.
Or you're talking about the drafts
SISMOA.
of these agreements.
Yeah. So SISMOA and that was basically all what we wanted was incorporated. In fact, our problem was, and they were totally disoriented by it, they said, we have said yes to all that you want. It's your draft which we accepted. So we can't take yes for an answer. So if you address all your expressed concerns, if you have subconscious concerns, you cannot address them. But all expressed concerns were met. And that was the, because people, defense minister at that time was, Mr. Pranab Mukherjee and all that, they're all very experienced people. They took the, the political situation, the other things, and certainly not into basis. So this is completely ill-informed, but what is the perception? What are you getting into? What are you getting into some kind of embrace which will not be able to get out of? But it is not so in reality. What will happen in terms of interoperability, and you pointed out, rightly, is what is it, firstly, not what the US wants, what is it which we want? What we want, ultimately, we want the area to be, multipolar. Right? Why, when you're talking, why get so dependent on these US crutches or their designs? The fact is, multipolar means one. If you talk about the emerging situation there, or say multi-aligned, we use different terminology, but what does it effectively mean? Effectively, who are going to be the major players there? Apart from the United States also is the only power today which has the capability of a global reach, military reach, apart from the other aspects. So it is going to be a major player in this area, and it has taken a decision to focus away from the Atlantic into what they call the Indo-Pacific.
Correct.
Okay. Now, in the Indo-Pacific area, if you take who are going to be the major players, and and we're just talking today, it's going to be basically what? It's going to be the USA, it's going to be China, it's going to be Russia, it's going to be Japan, Australia, if you take that other part of the Pacific, and of course India. And hopefully we'll be playing greater and greater role. So if you look at that, if you tie up with all the others, most of them happen to, and South Korea, it's a very major maritime country coming up in terms of all capabilities. If you look at them, 3 of them happen to be US allies. If you look at Vietnam, see what direction they are going. So you'll have to take those realities. So if you want to have interoperability, which is without which you will not have the optimal operations in anything, not only disaster relief, in anything, anti-piracy, any aspect, counter-terrorism, nothing on energy security, nothing you will be able to operate optimally without interoperability. So whom do you have interoperability with? You can have it, of course, with the People's Liberation Army, most certainly. There should be a stage where we come to that level of trust where you can have it. Or you can have it with the United States. Sometimes you might have to choose. So you'll have to do it not in terms of abstract thinking, but in terms of actually what do we do on the ground. So from that point of view, I think we'll have to take it, some of the things, what the Americans ask sometimes in terms of, these, I talked about Bangalore, for instance, the supercomputer. We're negotiating a separate one. In the public domain, what is available is that the Americans, cancel the second one. Actually, it was wrong. What we did is we rejected the second one. Why? Because of intrusive conditionalities of inspections. So, and a lot of this is still there in some of their end-use monitoring and some of the other aspects, which are very painful and which we have to overcome, and there should be greater trust.
Wonderful. Well, I think as Toby mentioned in his introduction, trade and investment tend to be a very important area, particularly for a place like Bangalore. And I think on trade, from what I've seen and heard about what's going to be happening in Delhi, trade is going to occupy a very big role. The 2 presidents are going to meet the CEOs forum. The 2 presidents